So I am a slow learner, but I do learn. That little brick that's in the back here that this connector plugged into, that little brick is basically the little mechanism that these dials operate, particularly the top ones. So when you go from off to max AC or any of these, what this does is that it starts taking power, electrical power, and sending it to the fan, which is down in there. Additionally, what it does is that if you turn this one, or this one on, it activates your air conditioning pump in the engine bay. So then you have the fan pushing the air, and you have the air conditioning cooling down a little metal piece back there that the air flows through. So the air gets sucked in there, gets pushed through this metal piece that is cooled down by the air conditioner. This wire is your AC pump power wire. These two wires are pretty much the wires, as I understand, limited understanding. Those are the wires that power the fan. Now, we've gotten rid of low and medium by getting rid of that whole switch, and I just basically plugged the wire for high directly in to the fan wire, which pretty much spits out as this, and then it comes into here. And then it also comes out right here too. So this wire goes in here, goes in there, which I spliced it back here, but this wire goes after this part. It goes here, then it goes into this brick, or this connector, goes into that little brick back here. See that little thing right there? Plugs in there. So power goes from here to here, into the connector, into the brick, and pops out right here. All right, I've pulled the connector off and I pulled the wire out. So this wire is the one that goes into the brick, and that's what gives the fan power. And we've only got the high wire right now. This wire right here goes from this connector into the brick, back out, back along the dash, and that's what gives it its juice. So basically from here to here, into there, into that little brick, which is where this pops into that little brick back there. All right, so these wires are all in the connector pops in there. This wire goes into that brick in the back, flows through the little circuits, pops back out right here, goes back down along the dash, goes into the fan. And if you activate any of these three circuits, it gives this green wire power, which goes to your air conditioning pump. So what's happening is that this wiring is getting old and it's crystallizing the copper, and it's 27-year-old Chinese or 27-year-old Chrysler wiring that is being fed by Chinese ignition to a fan that's wanting to pull far more power and spin faster, which is a good thing. But this fan is wanting to spin faster and pull more power than these wires 27 years ago were designed to provide. And that this ignition, obviously, since we replaced it 5 times, hasn't been designed to provide to that, and then from there to that. That's why this keeps burning out. That's why this keeps burning out. It's because that thing's pulling too much juice. So, but the good news is that when you do give it juice, it does blow air faster, pushes air further. So you get better air conditioning, kind of, sort of. Air comes out faster. So what I did is disconnected this, bypassed, disconnected this coupling from the brick back there and all these little circuits right here. So this brick was melting and this coupling was melting. You see the burned wires. Disconnected the coupling connector thingy, pulled the wires out, took the most conductive coin I had, which is a dime, has the most copper, believe it or not a penny. Dimes are more conductive, they have more copper. And I took the power wire that comes from the alternator, or technically the ignition. I took the power wire that comes from the ignition, fed it into a dime. It jumps back out of the dime goes down this wire here to feed the fan. And that was the first picture and video that I sent you, just these two wires right here. Well, the problem was it was blowing good air, but it wasn't blowing cold air. It was just blowing ambient temperature air. So the air compressor, or the air conditioning compressor, the AC compressor, wasn't kicking in. So I finally figured out through trial and error, and shocking myself about a dozen times, electricity sucks for the record, finally figured out that this green wire that was in this coupling gave power to the air conditioning pump, which cools that metal piece back there that all the air from the fan gets pushed through to cool it down. So the air gets sucked in down there, gets pushed through the fan pushes all that air through this metal piece that the air conditioning pump cools, and then as that air passes through, it cools the air and then it spits it out the vents. So this is the main power wire that comes in. So this is the power wire from the ignition, feeding power to a dime. Off of this power wire through a dime, I am feeding the fan the electricity it needs, and feeding the air conditioning pump the electricity it needs. This has an added benefit of cooling the wires themselves. So since that fan is a Chinese fan, it wants to pull way more electricity because it wants to spin way faster than these wires were ever designed to handle 27 years ago, much less now since they're crystallized and they're old copper. And this fan definitely wants to pull more juice than this Chinese ignition system was designed to provide. This burns out and this burns out. So to prevent burnouts, hooking these wires, hooking the power wire up to the fan wire and the AC compressor wire, which is overheating and melting this plastic connector and overheating and melting this brick back here. Since they're connected into the dime, it's acting as a radiator. And by pulling the wires out of the dash, I can get to them easier, one. And two, the vent right here is actually cooling the wires. So it looks like shit, but I have solved the overheating problem where the wires want to melt and melt the connector and melt the coupling back there and burn this thing out. This is gonna burn out no matter what. I can't fix that. But these right here and this melted connector and that melted brick back there, I've just got rid of all that shit, and now I have the cold air blowing directly on these wires that like to get hot, and using this dime as basically a radiator or a heat sink. So it's fixed, long story short. It looks like shit. I wouldn't dare call it safe, but it's working, and it's not overheating, and it's not smelling like burnt plastic. The next trick is to see if I can get the defrost to work, which is what we're gonna do now. That works. That works. That works. That works. Hey, we got life. Not blowing that great, but whatever. Good enough for a government job. It is blowing though, and we're not driving down the road, so let's see if it pushes out hot air. Yeah, you can see the little tape moving. So it is blowing air. Not great, but it is blowing. So I think we're back in business. I'll try to find a way to make this look pretty, but for now, that's fixed. Next step is to grease the brakes. If my shoulder will allow me to get the fucking wheel off and back on. That's the important part. But it's fixed. All these work now, especially the defrost. That was our problem child. And that was where the overheating liked to occur. And so far, we're staying relatively cool. I mean, I can touch them with the heat on and the defrost on. Let's see here. It's warm, but it's not like melting the wires and catching the dashboard on fire hot. It's warm, but it's not smoking. So yeah, It might be MacGyver rig, but it's fixed, babe.